7 wealthy women came to win my daughter's heart, but the only one she chose was the woman scrubbing our floors. If you're new here, subscribe and join us for more true stories that prove love is stronger than class, prejudice, or wealth. The late spring air in Buckhead, Atlanta, carried the faint scent of magnolia blossoms through the iron gates of David Harper's sprawling estate. Beyond the manicured hedges and marble fountains, an unspoken tension hung in the air. The kind that comes before storms. Inside, the great hall gleamed. Italian marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a chandelier the size of a small car, prepared for the most unusual contest the Harper household had ever seen. David Harper, 42, self-made billionaire and widowed father of a 9-year-old girl named Ava, stood at the foot of the grand staircase, hands folded behind his back. His gaze drifted to the gilded clock on the far wall, its ticking steady but slow. Today was the day. 7 women, each wealthy, educated, and polished by years in the upper echelons of Atlanta's social scene, were about to arrive for a trial cohabitation that David had arranged. The idea had been simple, at least on paper. Let Ava spend 2 weeks with each of them under the same roof, observe the chemistry, and perhaps, finally, choose a stepmother who could fill the void left after her mother's passing. It was Ava's idea as much as his, or so he told himself. In truth, David had been prodded by friends, colleagues, even the occasional meddlesome board member who thought his lonely widower image could use softening. And yet, as the first sleek black town car glided up the drive, his gut twisted. The front door opened to a flurry of introductions. Victoria Hale, tall, platinum blonde, a fixture in Atlanta's charity galas, entered first, her designer heels clicking across the marble. She kissed the air beside David's cheek, then lowered herself to greet Ava with a smile too practiced to be warm. One by one, the others followed. Monica Sinclair, sharp as a diamond and twice as cold. Caroline Vance, widow of a real estate magnate. Sylvia Morrow, whose family name carried political weight. Eliza Bennett, a celebrity chef with a southern cooking empire. Patricia Lane, owner of an art gallery in Midtown. And lastly, Julia Prescott, an heiress whose grandfather had built half the skyscrapers in Atlanta. They all knew each other. David saw it in the quick glances, the raised brows, the small, knowing smirks. In another setting, this would be a society luncheon. But here, in his home, their smiles were weapons and their words, ammunition. It didn't take long for the fault lines to appear. Within hours, an unspoken alliance formed among them, a we that excluded one person entirely. That person wasn't Ava. It wasn't David. It was Keisha Morgan, the 30-year-old cleaning staff member who had joined the Harper estate just 4 months earlier. Keisha arrived in the foyer carrying a tray of lemonade for Ava, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, her uniform crisp despite the Georgia humidity. Ava's face lit up the instant she saw her. "Keisha!" Ava ran forward, wrapping her arms around the woman's waist. David noted the way Keisha bent down, speaking softly, her voice a balm in the room's growing tension. "I saved the last lemon bar for you," Keisha whispered, slipping a small plate into Ava's hands. From across the room, Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly. Monica's eyes narrowed. The other women exchanged looks, tiny flashes of disdain masked as polite disinterest. That evening, the estate's long dining table gleamed under candlelight. 7 crystal glasses caught the firelight, each one placed precisely, each woman positioned like a chess piece. Ava sat between David and Keisha, laughing at a story about a squirrel that had stolen one of Keisha's cleaning rags and carried it up a pecan tree. By dessert, David noticed Ava had spoken more tonight than in the past 3 family dinners combined. She leaned against Keisha's arm, shoulders relaxed, eyes bright. It was the kind of ease that couldn't be faked, and the kind that couldn't be ignored. After dinner, while the women retired to the lounge for after-dinner drinks, David excused himself to take a call. When he returned, the low hum of conversation reached his ears before the words did. The lounge door was slightly ajar. "She's sweet, but honestly, she's not our kind," Monica's voice, smooth and condescending, filtered through. "Not even close," Victoria replied. "And the girl, Ava, she's impressionable. If we don't step in, she'll get attached." "And then what? David can't possibly think a maid is wife material." There was a murmur of agreement, the clink of glasses. Caroline's voice followed. "We'll have to be strategic. Win Ava's trust. Make her see Keisha for what she is." David's jaw tightened. He pushed the door open just enough to see them. 7 women in silk and jewels, lounging like predators in a velvet cage. The next morning, he found Ava in the rose garden with Keisha, braiding flowers into the child's hair. It was the kind of scene he wished he could frame forever, yet he couldn't ignore what he'd overheard. By mid-morning, the trips began. One by one, the women took turns whisking Ava away, to the High Museum of Art, to brunch at Swan Coach House, to the stables for horseback riding. Each outing came with carefully seeded remarks. "She's nice, but don't you think she's a little bossy sometimes? Your dad works so hard, he deserves someone who really fits in with his world. People from other backgrounds sometimes don't understand our lifestyle." Ava didn't say much in return, but that night, David noticed her tossing in bed, eyes open in the dim light of the hall. "Can't sleep?" he asked from the doorway. She shook her head. "I just don't like when people talk about Keisha." That was the moment David decided to act. 2 days later, a discreet team installed a network of high-definition cameras and sensitive microphones throughout the estate. David wasn't proud of it, but he needed to know if the conversations he'd overheard were isolated, or if something deeper was at play. What the footage revealed over the next week made his stomach churn. He watched as the women performed kindness in front of him, only to drop their masks when they thought no one was listening. He heard the careful orchestration of their plan, the agreement to undermine Keisha subtly, to plant seeds of doubt in Ava's mind. And always, woven into their words, was the thread of quiet, genteel prejudice. By the end of the week, David knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, these women didn't care about Ava, not really. They cared about winning. Second, Keisha, whether she knew it or not, was in the middle of a war she hadn't signed up for, and if he didn't step in soon, the cost wouldn't just be Ava's peace of mind. It would be her trust. The hum of the hidden devices was imperceptible to anyone except David Harper, who had watched the installation with an intensity that made the technicians tread lightly. Each micro-lens had been placed with surgical precision, behind the gilded frames in the lounge, in the ornamental vases flanking the dining room, even tucked between the leather-bound volumes in the library. The microphones, no larger than a button, were embedded in places no one would think to search. Only David and his head of security knew the full extent of it. For the first 24 hours, the footage was mundane. The women floated around the estate like well-dressed phantoms, sipping tea, flipping through magazines, commenting on the weather. But David knew this was the surface layer, the polished front they could maintain for short bursts. It was in the casual moments, when they thought no one was watching, that their truest selves emerged. The first crack came on a humid Thursday morning. Ava had been invited by Sylvia Morrow to spend the day at the Botanical Gardens. The plan sounded wholesome enough: flowers, butterflies, maybe a picnic. But when David pulled up the feed from the black SUV's interior camera, his heart tightened. "Your friend Keisha is nice, isn't she?" Sylvia began, her tone syrupy sweet. Ava nodded cautiously. Sylvia smiled wider. "I just wonder if she really understands what's best for you. You're growing up in a very refined environment. Sometimes people who come from humbler places, don't really know how to guide a young lady properly. Ava frowned, staring out the window. She listens to me, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Monica Sinclair, seated in the back beside Ava, leaned in. Listening is good, but your father, he deserves someone who can stand beside him at the governor's ball, who knows the right fork to use at a 12-course dinner. You wouldn't want people whispering about your family, would you? The car's cabin was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ava didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her small shoulders had tensed, and David felt a surge of protective anger. Later that day, another camera, this one in the upstairs hallway, caught Victoria Hale slipping into the guest wing where Keisha's modest room was located. She glanced over her shoulder twice before disappearing inside. 2 minutes later, she emerged, smoothing her dress, a faint smirk playing at her lips. David leaned closer to the monitor, pulse ticking faster. That evening, the women put on their masks again. Over canapes and champagne in the drawing room, they laughed in unison at one another's quips, their eyes glittering with the kind of practiced warmth that fools strangers, but never family. Ava sat quietly next to Keisha, who had joined them only because Ava insisted. Every time Keisha spoke, David caught the almost imperceptible exchange of looks among the women, like silent semaphores signaling mutual disdain. The following day, Ava went out with Patricia Lane to a brunch at Swan Coach House. In the SUV, Patricia leaned across the seat. "Sweetheart, do you know where Keisha worked before this?" "She told me," Ava replied. "She was a teacher." Patricia's lips curved, but her eyes stayed cold. "Yes, in public schools. That's admirable, of course, but it's hardly the same as someone who's traveled the world, met diplomats, attended finishing school in Europe. Your life is going to be big, Ava. You need someone who's been there before." David sat in his study watching the feed, his knuckles white against the armrest. The most damning footage came 3 days later. In the upstairs library, the 7 women had gathered in what they clearly believed was privacy. Victoria stood at the center, like a conductor before an orchestra, her voice low but commanding. "She's got him wrapped around her finger," Victoria said, pacing between the velvet chairs. "And the girl, too. If we let this go on, one of us is going to lose before we've even begun." Monica crossed her legs, her red heel bobbing in irritation. "We've been over this. We need to show David that she's not what she seems. Make her slip. Create situations." Caroline spoke up from the corner. "The problem is she's squeaky clean. No bad habits, no scandals. She's practically a saint." "That just means," Victoria replied smoothly, "we have to help her develop a flaw." There was a ripple of laughter, low and knowing. David rewound the footage twice, needing to be sure of what he'd heard. He didn't notice Keisha pass by his office door that evening, a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She caught sight of the monitors, the grainy black and white feeds. Her eyes flicked to his, but she said nothing, just nodded once, the way a soldier acknowledges another on a silent battlefield. That night, David lay awake longer than Ava had during her restless spell the week before. He thought about his daughter's trust, how fragile it was, how easily a child's sense of safety could be shattered. And he thought about Keisha, the way she seemed to meet every cruel glance with quiet dignity, every whisper with a small, steady smile. On Saturday morning, the women escalated their efforts. Ava returned from a shopping trip with Eliza Bennett, carrying a silk dress far too formal for a child's wardrobe. Eliza knelt in front of her in the hallway, adjusting the hem. "See how beautiful you look?" "Keisha wouldn't understand clothes like this. She's practical, which is fine, but in your world, presentation matters. You need someone who can prepare you for it." "I like how Keisha dresses," Ava said, glancing down at her sneakers. David, standing unseen at the top of the stairs, felt a grim satisfaction. Ava's loyalty wasn't crumbling. Not yet. But the women weren't finished. That evening, as Keisha cleared plates from the dining room, Sylvia drifted in behind her. "You must feel very fortunate," Sylvia murmured, her words sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "Not many people get to climb so far in such a short time. You've made quite an impression on Ava." Keisha kept her gaze on the plates. "She's a good kid. She deserves kindness." "Yes, of course." Sylvia stepped closer. "But kindness can come from many people. Don't mistake her affection for permanence." Keisha didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. "I don't," she said simply, then walked past her with the tray. By Sunday evening, David had seen enough to know this wasn't just social jockeying. This was a coordinated effort to erode Keisha's place in the household, and by extension, Ava's trust in her. The lines had been drawn. In the quiet after dinner, David found Ava in her room, sitting cross-legged on her bed with Keisha beside her. They were going through a photo album, pictures of Ava's mother, candid moments David hadn't even known had been captured. "Your mom," Keisha said gently, "was the kind of person who noticed everyone. Not just the people at the table, but the ones serving the food, the ones holding the door. That's why people loved her." Ava looked up. "That's why I love you." Keisha smiled, blinking back something David couldn't quite read. "That means a lot, Ava. But you have to promise me something. You'll always listen to your own heart. Even if people try to tell you otherwise." David stepped back from the doorway before they could see him. The cameras had given him proof, but more than that, they had given him clarity. This wasn't about just exposing the women's prejudice or protecting Keisha from their schemes. This was about showing Ava, once and for all, that the worth of a person had nothing to do with the size of their bank account or the circles they moved in. And David was ready to fight for that lesson, no matter how ugly the battle became. The Sunday sun slanted low over Buckhead, flooding the estate's gardens with a late afternoon glow. From the veranda, David could hear Ava's laughter mingling with the sound of a garden hose spraying across the rose bushes. Keisha was out there, sleeves rolled up, showing Ava how to water without bruising the petals. But David's mind kept circling back to what he had seen and heard over the past week. The cruelty of the 7 women was sharper than any blade because it hid behind politeness. Keisha bore it with a stillness that made David wonder what battles she had fought before this, what had forged that kind of quiet strength. He didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, while Ava worked on a puzzle in the library, David found Keisha in the kitchen, packing away the leftover lemon bars Ava adored. The light caught on her face, and for the first time since she'd come to work for him, he saw her look tired. Not physically, but somewhere deeper, like a scar that still ached in bad weather. "Keisha," he said gently, "I want you to know. I've seen what's going on, and I've heard things. This isn't about you doing anything wrong." She met his gaze, and for a moment he thought she might say nothing, but then she drew a breath and leaned against the counter. "Mr. Harper," she began, still calling him that. Though he'd told her to use his first name, this isn't the first time I've been told I don't belong. Her eyes drifted somewhere far away. "I was 14 when it happened. My mama was working as a housekeeper in Charleston, South Carolina, for a family that owned half the properties downtown. We lived in the servants' quarters out back. I'd play with their youngest daughter. She was just a year younger than me. We were inseparable. Until one afternoon, the lady of the house came home early and found us in the kitchen making peanut butter sandwiches." Keisha's voice flattened. She didn't yell. She just smiled that cold kind of smile and said, "Your mother will be packing tonight." David felt his stomach tighten. "They told her it was because I was getting too familiar." said I was a bad influence. I knew the truth even then. It was because they didn't like seeing me treated like family. Mama cried that whole night while we packed, but she told me something I've never forgotten. They can take the job, Keisha, but they can't take who you are. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the dish towel, twisting it once, then again. I worked my way through high school, got a scholarship to Clark Atlanta University. I studied education because I wanted to be the kind of adult who told kids they did belong. I ended up working for Fulton County Public Schools as a special education assistant. Most of my kids had been through things most adults wouldn't survive: homelessness, foster care, abuse. I knew how to talk to them because, well, I'd been there. There was a flicker of pride in her eyes then. One year, they tried to cut funding for a program that helped those kids get counseling. I wasn't a lawyer, but I gathered every piece of data, every parent testimony, and I went to the school board. They told me it was a lost cause, but I won. Kept the program running another 3 years. David felt something shift in the air between them. This was more than just a story. It was the blueprint of the woman Ava had instinctively trusted from day one. "So why did you leave?" he asked. Keisha's gaze dropped to the countertop. "My mama got sick. Stage 4 breast cancer. I couldn't juggle the hospital visits, the bills, and the school. So I quit. Took whatever jobs I could, cleaning houses, office temp work. After she passed..." She paused, and David saw her swallow hard. "I needed something steady. This job came up, and I thought, at least here I can work quietly, keep my head down." David's mind flickered back to the footage of the women's plotting, the venom laced in their soft voices. "They don't know who they're dealing with," he said quietly. Keisha smiled faintly. "They think I'm just the help. That's fine. I've been underestimated before, but it's Ava I worry about." Kids can feel when someone's trying to pull them away from someone they trust. That kind of wound, it sticks. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He'd seen that wound before, in himself, in the way Ava clung to Keisha's presence, the way a ship clings to its anchor. The following day, Ava woke with dark circles under her eyes. At breakfast, she pushed her cereal around without eating. David knew the signs. The pressure was wearing on her. Keisha crouched beside Ava's chair. "Hey," she said softly. "How about after schoolwork we take a trip to Piedmont Park? Just you and me. No fancy dresses, no plans. We can get ice cream and feed the ducks." Ava's face lit up for the first time all morning. From across the table, Victoria's voice cut in like a blade wrapped in silk. "That sounds quaint. But don't you think Ava should be experiencing more sophisticated activities? She'll be at an age soon where impressions matter." Keisha didn't look at her. "Impressions are made by kindness, not ticket prices," she said, standing and taking Ava's bowl to the sink. David almost laughed at the look on Victoria's face, like someone unused to being challenged had just been told no for the first time in years. That afternoon, while Ava was out with Keisha, David found himself scrolling through old contact lists until he landed on one. Dr. Angela Morrison, Keisha's former professor at Emory. If Keisha was right about the damage being done to Ava's sense of trust, Angela could help assess it and perhaps strengthen Ava against the subtle manipulation. By the time Keisha returned, Ava's cheeks were flushed from the wind, her hair tousled, and there was the unmistakable smell of waffle cones in the air. She clutched a small bag of duck-shaped erasers from the park gift shop, holding them like treasure. And for that evening, at least, the shadow over her had lifted. But in the quiet after Ava went to bed, David replayed Keisha's words about wounds that stick. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The 7 women were moving pieces into place, and the real strike had yet to come. The difference now was that David understood exactly who was standing at Ava's side, not just a housekeeper, but a woman who had already fought and won battles for children who couldn't fight for themselves. And that, he thought, might just be the advantage they needed. The first hints of spring rain swept over Buckhead on a Wednesday afternoon, tapping against the estate's tall windows like an impatient guest. In the drawing room, 7 women sat in a semicircle of silk and polished leather, sipping tea that had gone cold. To anyone passing by, they looked like a picture from Southern living, but the microphones David had hidden told a different story. Victoria Hale's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the genteel quiet. "She's been here too long without tripping up. If we're going to convince David, we need proof she's unfit. And if we can't find it..." She leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the lamplight. "We'll create it." There was a murmur of assent, the sound of porcelain cups settling onto saucers. "How?" Patricia Lane asked, crossing one leg over the other. "We build a file," Victoria said smoothly. "Every late arrival, every minor mistake, every interaction we can twist into something questionable. We'll make her look careless, maybe even dangerous. And when the time is right, we'll present it to David." Monica Sinclair's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We could also engineer a situation, something that puts Ava at risk. Not real risk, of course, but enough to plant doubt." The most chilling part was how calmly they discussed it, as though plotting the downfall of a woman who'd done nothing wrong was no different than planning a charity luncheon. From the hallway outside, David stood motionless, every word feeding a slow-burning fury in his chest. The first strike came 2 days later. It was a Saturday morning, the house filled with the smell of pancakes. Ava bounded into the kitchen, wearing the bracelet her mother had given her on her 7th birthday, a delicate gold chain with a small heart-shaped charm. It was one of her most treasured possessions. By afternoon, the bracelet was gone. Ava searched everywhere, her room, the garden, even under the sofa cushions. Her small face was pale with worry when she told Keisha. "Don't cry yet," Keisha said gently. "Things have a way of turning up in the last place you look." But when the bracelet was found the next morning, it was in the bottom drawer of Keisha's nightstand. Ava stood frozen in the doorway as Victoria held up the chain between 2 fingers, her expression the perfect mix of triumph and feigned concern. "I was looking for extra towels in the linen closet," Victoria explained sweetly, "and thought I should check the staff rooms for laundry. Imagine my surprise." Monica clucked her tongue. "That's unfortunate." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ava's eyes darted to Keisha's. Keisha didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself with frantic words or point fingers. She only crouched to Ava's level and said softly, "You know the truth in your heart. Hold on to that." Ava's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded, but David could see the confusion in her gaze. That night, David reviewed the camera footage from the guest wing. At 11:42 p.m., Victoria could be seen entering Keisha's room. She wasn't carrying towels. In her left hand, glinting faintly in the dim hall light, was the bracelet. The next morning, David invited Marcus Thompson, the private investigator he'd hired, into his study. Marcus was a former Atlanta PD detective with a knack for uncovering rot in places that looked pristine from the outside. "They're escalating," David said, sliding the footage across the desk. "I need everything. Backgrounds, scandals, the kind of dirt that sticks." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That'll take more than a couple of Google searches." "Good," David said. "I'm not interested in rumors. I want proof. And Marcus, be careful. These women know people, the kind who can make problems disappear." Marcus grinned without humor. "So do I." While Marcus began his work, Keisha made a quiet phone call from the laundry room. "Danielle," she said when her sister answered, "I think I'm about to be set up. Again." Danielle Morgan had the kind of voice that could slice through static on a bad line. Tell me everything. By the time Keisha hung up, Danielle had already reached out to her contacts in D.C. She had spent years as an investigative journalist for CNN, unearthing scandals in the financial sector, and she knew exactly how to trace money trails and social connections. In the meantime, the Good Cop Act began. Two of the women, Caroline and Eliza, started behaving with a warmth so out of character that Keisha instantly recognized it as strategy. They complimented her cooking, asked about her day, even suggested they all plan a girls' outing with Ava. The cameras caught the truth later. Caroline and Eliza meeting with Victoria in the upstairs lounge, outlining how their friendliness would lure Keisha into dropping her guard. "She'll think we're allies," Eliza said, sipping champagne. "Then we can confide in her, get her to say something David can't ignore." David watched the footage in his study, jaw clenched. Every move they made was calculated, every smile rehearsed. By Thursday, Marcus returned with a preliminary report. It was a gold mine. Victoria Hale had been quietly investigated for misusing funds from her charity's scholarship program. Monica Sinclair's husband had settled a discrimination lawsuit involving their family business. Sylvia Morrow's campaign donations were linked to a shell company tied to tax evasion. Caroline Vance had falsified property appraisals. Eliza Bennett's restaurant empire had been cited for multiple health code violations, buried by a well-placed bribe. Patricia Lane's gallery was accused of selling forged art pieces. Julia Prescott's family trust was under review for questionable real estate deals. David felt a grim satisfaction. These women had wanted a dossier. Now he had one. But they weren't finished yet. On Friday evening, just before dinner, Ava came into the library clutching her sketchbook. "Keisha said I could show you the picture I made for her," she told David. It was a drawing of Keisha and Ava in the rose garden, the sun overhead, both smiling. On the back, in Ava's uneven handwriting, "Family." David's throat tightened. He glanced toward the hallway where the women's laughter floated in, high and brittle. They thought they were playing a game, but they had no idea David had stopped being a spectator. This was war now, and he and Keisha were done playing defense. The night Marcus delivered his preliminary report, the Harper estate felt like a fortress under siege. Rain slicked the long driveway, the wrought iron gates stood closed, and David's study glowed with the soft light of a single desk lamp. He sat behind his mahogany desk, the stack of damning documents between them like a loaded weapon. "They think they're hunting," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "But they don't realize they're the prey now." David flipped through the pages. Charity fraud, discrimination settlements, bribery, tax evasion. Each entry was a chisel against the women's carefully constructed reputations. But the dossier was just the foundation. He needed more, proof that was airtight, irrefutable, and delivered in such a way that no one could bury it. That was where Danielle Morgan came in. When Keisha had called her older sister in Washington, D.C., Danielle had wasted no time. She was the kind of journalist who didn't just uncover scandals, she detonated them. Her reporting had once toppled a hedge fund CEO who thought offshore accounts made him untouchable. She knew the mechanics of power, who could be bought, who could be broken, and who would sell a story for the right cause. 3 days after Keisha's call, Danielle arrived in Atlanta. She swept into the Harper estate on a Tuesday morning, trench coat still damp from the rain, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. She hugged Keisha tightly, then turned to David with a firm handshake. "I've read the report Marcus pulled together," she said without preamble. "It's solid, but if you want to make this public without risking defamation claims, you need corroboration, bank records, witness statements, maybe even a few whistleblowers. I can get those." David nodded. "And if we do this?" Danielle's gaze was unwavering. then we don't just protect Ava and Keisha. We make sure none of these women can use their money or status to hurt someone like this again. They set up a temporary operations hub in one of the estate's unused sitting rooms. Marcus brought in a corkboard and began pinning photographs, timelines, and printed emails. Danielle spread out her laptop, a portable scanner, and a stack of NDAs for any potential witnesses they might convince to talk. Keisha moved quietly between them, making coffee, bringing in trays of food, scanning the board with a growing look of determination. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. This was her fight, too. The seven begin to sense the shift. It didn't take long for the women to notice something was changing. Their good cop act was faltering. Keisha was polite but distant, and David's behavior had shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. He was no longer available for impromptu lunches or evening drinks. When they passed him in the hall, he seemed preoccupied, his phone in hand, his expression unreadable. On Wednesday, Sylvia cornered Monica in the upstairs hallway. "Something's off. He's avoiding us." Monica frowned. "He's just busy." "No," Sylvia said sharply. "He's planning something. And if it's about that ridiculous bracelet nonsense, we need to get ahead of it." What they didn't know was that Marcus had already found a former staffer from Victoria's charity who was willing to talk. The woman had kept meticulous records of scholarship funds that had disappeared into shell accounts. Danielle, meanwhile, was working her DC contacts. By Thursday morning, she had in her possession 2 damning spreadsheets from an anonymous whistleblower in the real estate sector, proof of Caroline Vance's falsified property appraisals. Bringing in Dr. Angela Morrison. While Danielle and Marcus dug for evidence, David made another strategic move. He called in Dr. Angela Morrison, Keisha's former professor at Emory. Angela had specialized in child psychology for over 20 years and had consulted in high-profile custody cases. When Angela arrived, Ava was in the sunroom, quietly drawing. The professor sat with her, asking gentle, open-ended questions while David watched from the doorway. After an hour, Angela joined him in the hall. "Your daughter is bright, empathetic, and deeply loyal," she said, "but she's also under stress. Children can't always articulate manipulation, but they feel it. If these women keep trying to erode her trust in Keisha, it will leave a mark." David's jaw tightened. "Then we need to end this before that happens." Angela glanced toward the sitting room where Danielle and Marcus were at work. "From what I've seen, you have the right team to do it. Escalation. By Friday afternoon, the women made their boldest move yet. They invited David to a private dinner. No Keisha, no Ava, at Victoria's Midtown penthouse. The setting was lavish. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline, crystal decanters, white glove servers. Victoria toasted him with a smile that didn't hide the steel in her eyes. "David, we're worried. About Ava. About the kind of influences she's being exposed to. This isn't about us. It's about your daughter's future." One by one, they laid out their fabricated concerns. Keisha overstepping boundaries, encouraging Ava to disrespect authority, creating an inappropriate closeness that could harm her social development. David listened without expression, swirling the wine in his glass. He didn't tell them he already had 3 separate video clips of them plotting exactly this conversation. When the dinner ended, he shook hands, smiled politely, and walked out knowing they had just given him the final piece he needed, their collective voice, recorded in perfect clarity, laying out their intent. The plan takes shape. That night, back at the estate, David joined Danielle and Marcus in the sitting room. "They just handed us the closing argument," he said, setting his phone on the table and pressing play. The women's voices filled the room, dripping with faux concern and calculated malice. Danielle's smile was sharp. "Perfect. We sync this with the video from the lounge where they planned the setup, add Marcus's documents, and get corroborating statements from our witnesses. Then we take it live. Marcus nodded. We'll need a venue big enough to hold press, cameras, and a few strategic guests who can amplify the message. I have a ballroom for that, David said. They agreed on the timeline. Within a week, the entire operation would go public. Every piece of evidence would be presented in front of the press, with Ava's choice made clear to the world. Keisha's resolve. Later, when the others had gone to bed, Keisha found David in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. "You're risking a lot for me," she said quietly. David met her eyes. "You're risking more, just by staying." For a moment they stood in the stillness, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then Keisha's voice softened. "When I was a teacher, I told my kids that the world is full of people who'll try to tell them they don't belong. The trick is finding the people who'll fight to prove they do. I didn't think I'd get to be on the receiving end of that." David's reply was simple. "Ava chose you long before I did. I'm just catching up." Keisha smiled faintly, but there was steel in her gaze now. "Then let's finish this." The storm was gathering, and in the quiet halls of the Buckhead estate, every person in David's inner circle knew it. The women had no idea that the noose they'd been weaving for Keisha was already tightening around their own necks. The battle lines were drawn. The allies were in place, and in just days, the ballroom would become the stage for a reckoning no one in Atlanta's high society would forget. The shift in the air was subtle at first, like the way the sky darkens a shade before a summer storm. By the time the women noticed it, the storm was already forming over their heads. It began with whispers they couldn't trace, a text from a friend in the city, "Saw your name come up in a conversation. Everything okay?" A missed call from a number they recognized but hadn't dialed in months. A lunch invitation from someone who usually avoided them unless there was political capital to gain. They didn't know that Danielle was the one pulling the strings. From the moment she arrived in Atlanta, Danielle had been making calls, not just to journalists, but to a tight network of political aides, nonprofit directors, and former colleagues who owed her favors. She didn't tell them exactly what was coming, only that certain names might be worth watching closely. At the same time, Marcus worked his contacts in the Atlanta Police Department and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. He wasn't just digging into the women's past scandals. He was cross-referencing those scandals with any ongoing investigations. That's when he found the link. 2 of the women's names appeared in a sealed subpoena related to a real estate fraud case. "This isn't just dirt," Marcus told David one night in the study. "This is evidence that could get them indicted if the DA decides to move." David didn't flinch. "Then we make sure the DA has it in hand before the ballroom meeting." Pressure on the inside. The women were still operating under the illusion that they controlled the pace of this contest. But David had stopped playing by their rules. He became polite but elusive, taking fewer of their calls, cutting meetings short. Ava, meanwhile, seemed to be slipping further from their reach, spending more time with Keisha and less with the women who tried to lure her away. That infuriated Victoria Hale most of all. "We're losing her," she told Monica in a clipped tone one afternoon in the conservatory. "And Harper's not as distracted as he was in the beginning. He's watching." Monica's reply was sharper. "Then we need to end this before he makes a decision." "And we both know what decision that will be." Victoria's gaze hardened. "Then we go all in." Marcus under threat. The next blow came not at the estate, but in the city. Marcus had arranged to meet a source, an accountant who had handled the books for one of the women's charities. The meeting place was a quiet bar in Midtown. The accountant didn't show. Instead, Marcus received a folded note slid across the table by a man in a black baseball cap. "Drop the Harper job or you won't make it home tonight." Marcus, ex-cop that he was, didn't spook easily. but the fact that they knew where he'd be meant someone in his circle had been compromised. He called David immediately. "They've got connections in politics and enforcement. If they're threatening me, it's because they're scared, but also because they think they can intimidate us." David's response was calm. "Double your security, and don't stop." The web tightens. Danielle, oblivious to the Midtown incident until Marcus briefed her later, had her own breakthrough. She managed to track down a junior event planner who had worked under Eliza Bennett. The woman agreed to meet, provided her name stayed out of any public filings. Over coffee in a small Grant Park cafe, the planner revealed that she'd been ordered to falsify invoices for gala expenses that never happened. The money, she said, had been funneled into a private account under Eliza's name. "That's embezzlement," Danielle said, leaning in. The planner nodded, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "I was told if I talked, I'd never work in this town again." "You're talking to the right people," Danielle assured her. By the end of the day, Danielle had a signed affidavit and copies of the falsified invoices. Ava feels the strain. Through all of this, Ava was trying to keep her world small. Puzzles in the library with Keisha, walks in the garden, quiet dinners with her father. But even she could feel the tension humming in the walls. One evening she asked David directly, "Daddy, why do they all want to be here so much? They don't seem like they even like me." David's heart tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, but she was 9 years old, and some truths had to wait. "Because sometimes people want things for the wrong reasons," he said gently. "But that's why you always trust what you feel in here." He tapped her chest. Ava thought about that for a long moment, then whispered, "I feel like Keisha's the only one who likes me for me." David smiled faintly. "That's because she does." The final pieces. By the end of the week, the corkboard in the estate's operations hub was so crowded with evidence that Marcus had started a second one. Danielle had secured 3 whistleblowers, 2 sets of financial records, and an email chain implicating Monica's husband in a discrimination cover-up. Angela Morrison prepared a short but devastating report on Ava's emotional state, carefully worded to show the measurable harm caused by manipulative behavior without dragging Ava through a public spectacle. David reviewed it all, then set the date for the ballroom meeting, Monday at 4 p.m. Invitations would go out to the 7 women that Friday evening, framed as an important household announcement. In truth, Danielle had already tipped off several major news outlets, including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and 2 national networks. The last bait. On Saturday, the women made one final attempt to draw Keisha into a compromising situation. Eliza appeared at the staff entrance just after lunch, holding a tray of petit fours. "Peace offering," she said sweetly. "I thought maybe we could start fresh." Keisha eyed the tray, then stepped aside. "Ava's upstairs working on her reading assignment." "Oh, I didn't mean for Ava," Eliza said, placing the tray on the counter. "Just you and me, a little chat." In the pantry, she poured tea and began a slow, deliberate conversation about how hard it must be for Keisha to see so many women interested in David. Then came the pivot. "If you were smart," Eliza murmured, "you could turn this into something. Ask for a payout. Walk away before the press gets wind of certain misunderstandings." Keisha didn't take the bait. She stood, her voice calm but cold. "If you have something to say it to David. I'm not for sale." What Eliza didn't know was that the entire exchange had been captured on video, and that Danielle had already scheduled it to play alongside the other footage during Monday's presentation, The Trap Springs Shut. By Sunday night, the net was ready to close. Marcus confirmed that the DA's office had been briefed and would be watching the live stream. Danielle had the whistleblowers on standby. Angela had Ava's report printed and ready. The ballroom was being prepped with discreet camera crews and a press riser. David took a moment alone on the back terrace, the lights of Atlanta twinkling beyond the trees. Keisha joined him, leaning on the railing beside him. "You ready for this?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "I'm ready to end it." She studied him for a moment. "Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, Ava's going to remember that you stood up for her, and for me. That matters more than anything." David looked at her then, really looked, and realized that this quiet alliance between them, was the thing the women could never fabricate or destroy. The storm was here, and in less than 24 hours, every mask would fall. The Monday air was thick and warm, even for Atlanta in early spring. By noon, the Harper Estate's grand ballroom was unrecognizable. Rows of gold Chiavari chairs faced a low stage draped in deep blue fabric. Spotlights hung from portable rigs. 2 projection screens flanked the stage, their black surfaces waiting to be lit with truth. The long mahogany floor gleamed under a fresh polish, as if it knew it would soon bear witness to history. Outside, news vans were lining the circular drive, their satellite dishes tilting toward the sky. Danielle's calls had worked. Local stations, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, CNN, and even a crew from Good Morning America were setting up tripods and adjusting mics. By 2 o'clock, the estate was under a quiet siege of curiosity. The arrival. The first to arrive was Monica Sinclair. She swept into the ballroom wearing a tailored emerald dress, a diamond brooch pinned like a badge of entitlement. She glanced at the camera crews with a flicker of confusion, but quickly masked it. "David didn't mention a press conference," she murmured to Caroline Vance, who had just arrived in a crisp white suit. One by one, the others entered. Sylvia, Eliza, Patricia, Julia, and finally, Victoria Hale in a navy sheath dress and a string of pearls. Victoria's eyes scanned the room, assessing the setup. She didn't sit right away, choosing instead to stand near the aisle with the poise of a woman who believed she was still in control. Keisha was already there, standing beside Ava in the front row. Ava wore a soft yellow dress and clutched a small bouquet of daisies Keisha had picked from the garden that morning. She kept glancing up at Keisha as if drawing strength from her presence. David entered last. He wore a charcoal suit and a tie the color of midnight, his expression calm but unreadable. The quiet in the room thickened as he stepped onto the stage and adjusted the microphone. Opening words. "Thank you all for coming," David began, his voice even. "When I invited each of you into my home, it was with the hope of finding someone who could be a partner in life and a loving presence for my daughter. I wanted Ava to have the chance to choose someone who would treat her with kindness, respect, and honesty." His gaze swept the room, landing on each of the 7 women in turn. "But over the past few weeks, I've learned that not all of you came here with those intentions. Today, I'm going to share what I've learned, with you and with everyone watching." A ripple of unease passed through the women. Monica's lips pressed into a thin line. Sylvia shifted in her seat. Victoria's chin lifted a fraction higher. The evidence. David stepped aside, and the first video began to play on the projection screens. It was footage from the upstairs lounge. Victoria pacing, Monica lounging with a glass of wine, Caroline leaning forward. The audio was crisp, their words unmistakable. "She's got him wrapped around her finger," Victoria's voice said. "And the girl, too. If we let this go on, one of us is going to lose before we've even begun." Monica's reply followed. "We need to show David that she's not what she seems. Make her slip. Create situations." The ballroom went still except for the faint hum of the speakers. The camera panned to show all 7 women nodding, smirking, or murmuring agreement. The second clip was sharper. Victoria entering Keisha's room at 11:42 p.m., the bracelet glinting in her hand. The next morning, Victoria finding it in Keisha's drawer. Gasps rippled through the press section. Reporters began scribbling notes. The turn then came the audio from Victoria's Midtown penthouse, just 4 nights earlier. The women's voices dripped with faux concern as they accused Keisha of overstepping and inappropriate closeness with Ava. Danielle, standing near the press riser, didn't miss the way Victoria's hand tightened on her pearl necklace. When the final clip ended, David returned to the microphone. "You came into my home pretending to care for my daughter. Instead, you tried to undermine her trust, isolate her from someone she loves, and protect your own reputations at her expense. That ends today." The public unraveling. Marcus stepped forward, holding a leather-bound folder. In this file are documented instances of fraud, tax evasion, discrimination settlements, and other misconduct, each tied directly to one of you. We have corroborating statements from whistleblowers, financial records, and in some cases, ongoing investigations. Copies have already been delivered to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. The projection screens lit again, this time with still images of documents, falsified invoices, offshore accounts, suspicious donation transfers. Danielle's voiceover explained each case with the precision of a seasoned reporter. Sylvia's face paled. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. Monica sat rigid, her eyes darting toward the exit. Ava's choice. David's tone softened as he turned toward his daughter. "Ava, you've been through more than any child should have to in the last few weeks. But through it all, you never stopped knowing who you could trust. I want you to tell everyone here what you told me last night." Ava stood. Small but steady. She looked out at the sea of faces and cameras. "Keisha's my family. I don't care if she cleans floors or runs a company. She listens to me. She's nice to me. I want her to be my mom." Keisha's breath caught, and the room, already tense, seemed to tilt toward her. The proposal. David turned back to the microphone. "Then that's what we'll do. Keisha, will you marry me?" The press collectively inhaled. Gasps from the audience mixed with the faint whir of camera shutters. Keisha stood frozen for a heartbeat, then smiled through the sudden gloss of tears. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. Ava rushed forward, wrapping both arms around Keisha's waist. The fallout. In the seconds that followed, the room fractured. Victoria stood abruptly, muttering something about defamation, before striding toward the exit, only to find a wall of cameras and microphones waiting. Monica's phone began to buzz non-stop, the name of her husband's company flashing on the screen. Eliza stared blankly at the floor, her mind clearly racing through damage control strategies. Outside, reporters began live-streaming reactions, their voices urgent over the hum of satellite trucks. Social media feeds lit up within minutes. Danielle's team had seeded hashtags, and by the time the ballroom began to clear, had Ava's choice and #Keisha wins were trending nationwide. A private moment. When the crowd finally dispersed, David, Keisha, and Ava found themselves alone on the stage. The press lights had been turned off, leaving the ballroom bathed in the softer glow of the chandeliers. David took Keisha's hand. "You didn't just survive what they tried to do. You showed Ava what it looks like to stand your ground with dignity." Keisha shook her head. "I just did what I had to." "No," David said quietly. "You did more than that. You gave her someone to believe in." Ava slipped her small hand into both of theirs. "Now we can be a family for real." The beginning of the end. By the time the sun set over Buckhead, the ballroom was empty, but the fallout was just beginning. Calls from attorneys had already started. The DA's office confirmed receipt of the evidence. And somewhere in the city, the 7 women were learning that the power they thought they owned had evaporated in a single afternoon. In the Harper estate, though, the air felt lighter. Keisha stood at the window with Ava beside her, both watching the last streaks of gold fade into night. David joined them, resting a hand on each of their shoulders. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning after the ballroom showdown, Atlanta woke to a media frenzy. Local news anchors replayed the clips from David Harper's estate every hour. National outlets picked up the story before lunch. By midday, the Harper name was trending in 20 states. The headlines varied in tone but not in impact. Billionaire father exposes high society sabotage. Hashtag Ava's choice goes viral. Housekeeper to become stepmother. Buckhead ballrooms and broken reputations. For David, the publicity was a double-edged sword. On one side, the truth was out. Keisha's name was no longer whispered with suspicion. It was being spoken in admiration. On the other, the tidal wave of attention meant every move they made was under a microscope. Morning at the estate. The estate's usually quiet breakfast room was filled with a strange hum that morning. A mix of Ava's chatter, the scent of fresh coffee, and the muted buzz of Danielle's phone receiving non-stop alerts. Keisha sat at the table in a simple cream blouse, hair tied back, no makeup beyond a touch of lip balm. She looked both lighter and more tired than David had ever seen her, like someone who'd just run a marathon and crossed the finish line. David slid into the chair beside her. "How's the internet treating you?" She gave a dry laugh. "Apparently I'm now the woman who humbled the Buckhead 7. Ava grinned, buttering her toast. "You're famous, Keisha." Keisha shook her head. "Fame isn't the goal, sweet pea. Keeping you safe is." The call from New York. Around 10 o'clock, David's phone lit up with a familiar name, a senior producer at Good Morning America. "We want you, Keisha, and Ava on the show tomorrow," the voice said. "Lev, America is eating this story up. It's got everything: family, resilience, justice. We want to give you the platform to set the record straight." David glanced at Keisha, covering the receiver. "They want us in New York. National audience." Keisha hesitated. "That's not really my world." "It is now," Danielle said from across the room. "And if you tell this right, you control the narrative before anyone else can twist it." The flight north. By that evening, the three of them were boarding David's Gulfstream for LaGuardia. Ava pressed her nose to the window as the lights of Atlanta receded. Keisha sat beside her, holding the little bouquet of daisies Ava had insisted on bringing, now tucked into a travel vase. David watched them, a quiet pride settling in his chest. Whatever the cameras caught tomorrow, this was the truth he wanted people to see. Times Square's glow. New York was brisk and electric when they arrived. The car ride from the airport took them past Times Square, its screens flashing with ads, headlines, and, David noticed with a jolt, one of the national news tickers carrying the words, "Keisha Morgan, the people's choice for Ava's choice." Keisha laughed softly. "Guess we can't pretend this is small anymore." Live on air. The next morning, under the bright studio lights of Good Morning America, the three of them sat across from the host. Cameras hovered, red lights blinking. "Keisha," the host began, "you were hired as household staff. Now you're about to become the stepmother to one of Atlanta's most high-profile little girls. How do you make sense of that journey?" Keisha's voice was steady. "I didn't set out to be anyone's stepmother. I just wanted Ava to feel safe, to know she had someone who would always listen to her. The rest, it happened because she chose me. And because her father listened." David added, "Money and status mean nothing if they're used to hurt people. My daughter reminded me of that. And Keisha reminded me of the kind of love that can't be bought." Ava leaned toward the microphone. "I just want everyone to know, Keisha's my family. That's all." The audience in the studio clapped, and for a moment, the bright lights seemed softer. Aftermath in Atlanta. When they returned home, the ripple effects had grown into waves. Two of the women, the ones Marcus had tied to the real estate fraud case, were subpoenaed. A third had resigned from her charity amid calls for a formal audit. Victoria Hale, once queen of the Buckhead Gala circuit, had vanished from public events entirely. Meanwhile, donations to Keisha's newly announced Ava's Choice Foundation, a scholarship program for underprivileged children interested in the arts, poured in faster than the bank could process them. The idea had been Ava's, sparked on the flight home from New York. "We can help other kids feel like they belong," Ava had said, sketching the foundation's logo on a napkin. A public commitment. 2 weeks later, David stood with Keisha and Ava at the steps of Atlanta's City Hall. A crowd had gathered, along with press from as far away as Los Angeles. "This isn't just our story," David told the cameras. "It's a reminder that integrity matters, whether you're in a boardroom, a classroom, or your own home. We're building something that lasts, and it starts here, with this foundation, and with the people who believe love is the greatest equalizer." Keisha spoke next, her voice carrying easily over the crowd. "Titles, bank accounts, and addresses don't make you worthy. The way you treat people does. Ava taught me that love is simple. You choose it, and you protect it." Ava held Keisha's hand and added, "And you don't let anyone tell you who your family should be the decision made." That afternoon, as they walked back through the estate's garden, Ava skipping ahead among the roses, David turned to Keisha. "We could have fought this quietly, settled things behind closed doors, but I'm glad we didn't. Now it's not just our win. It belongs to everyone who's been told they don't belong." Keisha smiled. "That's the best part." In the distance, Ava bent to pick a daisy. She turned and waved it high above her head. "For the garden!" she called. Keisha laughed, taking David's hand. They walked toward Ava, the sun warming their faces, the weight of the last month finally lifting. The choice had been made, not just in a ballroom in Buckhead, but in front of a nation. And this time, it was the right one. The Buckhead estate had changed in ways no one could have predicted 3 years earlier. The manicured gardens were still there, the marble still gleamed, but there was something warmer in the air, an openness that felt more like a family home than a fortress. On a bright Saturday morning in early May, Keisha Harper stood at the kitchen island, arranging fresh tulips in a tall glass vase. She wore a faded t-shirt from the Atlanta Jazz Festival and jeans smudged with paint. Her phone was propped up against the sugar jar, playing soft Miles Davis while she hummed along. From the back patio came the sound of piano keys, clear, precise, and almost professional. Ava, now 11, was running through a Chopin piece for the second time that morning, her posture straight, fingers dancing effortlessly. In the past 3 years, she'd mastered not only the piano but also violin and flute, and had begun conversational French, Spanish, and American Sign Language. David walked into the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee, one of them for Keisha. He'd traded his suits for a simple navy polo and khakis, the sharp edges of his corporate life softened by the last few years of deliberate choices. "She's in the zone," David said, nodding toward the patio doors. Keisha smiled, tucking the last tulip into place. "She's got that audition for the youth orchestra next week. I think she's ready." "She's more than ready," David said. He handed Keisha her coffee. "And so are you. Big day tomorrow." The foundation's growth tomorrow was the annual gala for the Ava's Choice Foundation, now one of the most respected arts scholarship organizations in Georgia. What had started as a small initiative, born from Ava's drawing on a napkin during a flight from New York, had grown into a fully funded nonprofit serving hundreds of children across Georgia and South Carolina. Keisha had taken the reins after earning her master's degree in special education from Emory University, a milestone she'd achieved while balancing family life, public appearances, and nonprofit leadership. She'd insisted that the Foundation's programs be more than just lessons. They included mentorship, mental health support, and community performances. Talent without support can burn out fast, she often said. We give them both. The open garden. The Harpers had also opened their estate's garden every weekend to neighborhood children. What had once been an immaculate off-limits expanse of roses and hedges was now dotted with picnic blankets, art easels, and the occasional soccer game. That morning, a group of kids from down the street wandered in with sketch pads, waving to Keisha before settling under the magnolia tree. Ava's friends from her music program arrived soon after, filling the patio with the warm chaos of preteens. David leaned against the doorframe, watching Keisha move between them with ease, offering snacks, adjusting an easel's height, reminding one child to reapply sunscreen. A return to Charleston. Earlier that year, Keisha had taken Ava on a trip to Charleston. They'd walked the cobblestone streets, visited the harbor, and, on the last day, stood outside the tall wrought-iron gate of the house where Keisha's mother had once worked. It had been abandoned for years, the garden overgrown, the shutters faded. Keisha had bought it at auction with her own savings. Within 6 months, it was reborn as the Charleston Community Arts Center, a place where kids could take free art and music classes after school. I wanted to take something from my past and give it a better ending, Keisha told Ava that day. You did, Ava replied. And now it's part of mine, too. Small moments of family. In the late afternoon, the house smelled faintly of basil and garlic. Ava had taken over dinner prep, determined to perfect her homemade pasta. David was setting the table when Keisha walked in with a bouquet of daisies Ava had picked from the garden. They're for the kitchen window, Keisha said, placing them in a mason jar. David kissed her cheek. Still your favorite flower? Always, she said. They remind me of beginnings. The three of them sat down to eat, laughter flowing easily between bites. Ava told them about her friend's upcoming recital. David shared a story about a new mentorship program at work, and Keisha recounted a funny mishap at the Foundation's rehearsal space. It was the kind of dinner they'd once only dreamed about, ordinary, safe, and whole. Ava's independence. After dinner, Ava disappeared into the music room. Keisha found her later, scribbling notes onto sheet music. What's that? Keisha asked. A song I'm writing, Ava said. For the gala tomorrow. I want to surprise everyone. Keisha sat beside her, pretending not to tear up. You've got your own way of changing the world, you know. Ava grinned. I learned from the best. A new chapter. That night, after Ava went to bed, David and Keisha sat on the back porch with glasses of sweet tea. Fireflies winked in the garden, and the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine. 3 years ago, I thought the ballroom showdown was the end of the story, David said. Turns out it was just the start. Keisha leaned against him. We were surviving back then. Now we're building. And we're not done, David said. Next year, the Foundation expands to Alabama. Keisha smiled at the thought, imagining new classrooms, new children, and new chances to change lives. The night before, as the clock neared midnight, the house was quiet. Keisha checked on Ava one last time, finding her asleep with a notebook still open beside her, pencil resting on the page. She tucked the blanket up to Ava's chin, brushed a curl from her forehead, and whispered, You're ready. In the hallway, David waited with an arm around Keisha's shoulders. Together, they walked to their room, knowing that tomorrow would be another step in a journey they'd chosen, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The morning of the gala dawned crisp and golden, sunlight spilling over the Buckhead estate like a blessing. In the garden, the dew clung to rose petals and the scent of magnolia drifted in on a soft breeze. The place looked more alive than ever, full of color, laughter, and the hum of preparation. Keisha stood at the French doors, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Out on the lawn, staff and volunteers bustled with purpose, setting up white canopies, arranging tables with cream linens, and placing fresh bouquets of daisies, the flower Ava had chosen as the symbol for the foundation. The gala would be held here, at home. Keisha had insisted on it. "It's not about chandeliers and hotel ballrooms," she'd told David. "It's about letting people see where love and change grew." Ava's surprise. Upstairs, Ava was a whirl of focused energy. Her dress, a soft blue with a satin sash, laid out on the bed beside her violin case. She'd kept her composition a closely guarded secret, working on it late at night under the soft glow of her desk lamp. When Keisha knocked on the door, Ava grinned. "It's ready," she whispered, holding up the sheet music. The title read, "For My Family." Keisha blinked hard, willing herself not to cry before makeup. "They're going to love it, Sweet Pea," the guests arrive. By early afternoon, the driveway was a slow-moving procession of cars. Community leaders, artists, musicians, teachers, and dozens of families whose children had received foundation scholarships stepped into the garden with warm smiles. There were no paparazzi this time, no flashbulbs or media vultures, only invited press from local outlets, chosen for their history of uplifting stories. Danielle was there too, dressed in a simple black dress, her press badge tucked into her clutch. Marcus arrived with his wife, both beaming. Even Dr. Angela Morrison came, bringing a group of her psychology students to volunteer. As guests wandered through the open garden, they passed plaques telling the foundation story. One display was devoted entirely to the moment that had started it all, Hatch Ava's choice, told not as a scandal, but as a turning point. The speech. When everyone was seated beneath the canopies, David stepped up to the small stage set at the edge of the garden. Behind him, the estate's roses stretched toward the sunlight, a perfect living backdrop. "3 years ago," he began, "this home was at the center of a storm. We could have closed our gates and waited for it to pass. Instead, we opened them, and what came through changed everything." He turned toward Keisha, who sat in the front row with Ava's hand in hers. "Keisha taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, listens deeply, and holds steady when everything else is shaking. Ava reminded me that the clearest wisdom often comes from the youngest voice in the room." His gaze swept over the crowd. The Ava's Choice Foundation was born from that wisdom. Today it belongs to every child who has ever been told they didn't belong, and to every family that believed in them anyway. Applause rose, warm and sustained. Ava's song. Then Ava stepped onto the stage, violin in hand. She looked out over the garden, the faces of friends, family, and strangers who had become part of her world. "This is for my family," she said simply. The first notes were delicate, almost hesitant, then grew into a melody that felt like sunlight through leaves. It carried the memory of quiet library afternoons with Keisha, of evenings in the garden with her father, of the first time she'd felt truly safe after her mother's passing. By the time she drew the bow across the final note, the entire garden was on its feet. Keisha rose too, unable to stay seated, and hugged Ava as the applause swelled around them. "You were perfect," she whispered. The symbol. After the performances and speeches, Keisha led everyone to a section of the garden that had been roped off. Inside was a small plot of freshly turned soil, and in its center, a young flowering tree. "This," Keisha said, "is a magnolia grown from a seedling that came from Ava's mother's favorite tree. It's the first thing I planted here after the garden opened to the public. I wanted it to be a reminder that love doesn't vanish when people do. It grows roots. It blooms again." David took Ava's hand and placed it on the tree's slender trunk. "This garden saw some ugly moments," he said, "but now it's full of laughter, and this tree will always remind us that what we choose to grow matters." Guests were invited to tie small ribbons to the lower branches. each with a message or wish for the children the foundation served. By the time the sun began to dip, the magnolia shimmered with dozens of bright ribbons. A quiet walk. As the last guests left, Keisha and David strolled through the now quiet garden. The magnolia stood at the center, lit softly by the first evening lamps. Ava was ahead of them, skipping between the rose bushes, stopping now and then to straighten a ribbon that had slipped loose. David reached for Keisha's hand. "We've done a lot in 3 years," he said. Keisha smiled. "And we're just getting started." Closing the circle. Later that night, long after the tables had been cleared and the music had faded, Keisha slipped outside alone. The magnolia tree was bathed in moonlight, its ribbons stirring gently in the breeze. She thought of her mother, of the little girl she'd been in Charleston, of the humiliation and injustice that had once seemed like her whole story. Now, she stood in the garden of a home that had once felt unreachable, not as an intruder but as a wife, a mother, and the co-founder of something that would outlive her. She touched the tree's trunk and whispered, "We made it." A warm hand settled on her shoulder. David's. Behind him, Ava stood in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. "Can we say goodnight to the garden together?" Ava asked. So they did. The three of them stood hand in hand beneath the magnolia, breathing in the scent of flowers and cool night air. And when they finally turned back toward the house, the garden behind them was no longer just a place where battles had been fought. It was a place of victory, of roots and blossoms, of endings that turned into beginnings. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. From the stormy days in Buckhead to the garden now filled with laughter, the journey of David, Keisha, and Ava is more than just a family's tale. It's proof that love, steadfastness, and kindness can overcome any prejudice. If you believe that everyone deserves to be chosen and loved for who they truly are, hit subscribe and join us in sharing more heartwarming stories like this one. We'll see you in the next journey.